Hey guys, I'm here today to talk to you guys again about Congress. And as you can see here, I have two of my favorite tattoos, love versus hate. And that tends to be how we feel about Congress. That we love members of Congress from our state, as in most people in Connecticut favor Elizabeth Esty, Richard Blumenthal, and Chris Murphy, whereas we hate Congress as a whole. So that's one of the broader concepts that we need to talk about, and that, for one reason or another, that tends to be how we feel about Congress as a whole. Love our congressmen, hate Congress as a whole because, well, as we talked about in our last chapter, the way the media covers it, generally they cover fights more. Generally they don't look at, some of the things they're getting done, although Congress in itself hasn't really gotten a lot done. And a lot of the, stuff that they put out in the news about them is showing them to, be largely unfavorable. We don't like corruption, things like that. All right, the next area we're going to look at is the gender composition of our Congress. So basically the demographics. As you can see here, it is still largely male for both the House and the Senate. But females are right now probably the largest they've ever been within Congress, and we hope to see, gains going forward, within our next election, 2016. Hopefully we'll see more females winning more seats, because that will obviously bring a different dynamic to the way we govern. Also, our racial composition has changed. Again, unfortunately, we still are largely white and male, but, we're seeing, growth in black representatives, Hispanics, Asians. We want to, continue to see those things. Obviously, within religion as well, it's still largely Christian, but there are people coming from different religions as well. All right, the next concept that we're going to get into is reapportionment, redistricting, or as I like to call it, gerrymandering. And you guys just played the game on this, and hopefully that you saw how to pack and crack. Obviously, if you control the legislature within a state and it's been 10 years, you have the census, you could redistrict, and obviously you want to favor your party. If it looks uncontrollably like you were doing this to just gerrymander, could go before the Supreme Court, you could lose, and obviously that has happened many times throughout our history. But that's a concept, and those are things that are happening right now. And, the Republicans, as we talked about, they've done a very good job of redistricting in our past 20 years, and that's also aided them in controlling the House. So that is a good tactic if you expect to win. All right, next we're going to talk about leadership. And obviously we can see here that Paul Ryan, he is our new Speaker of the House. And, the Speaker of the House is the only one listed in the Constitution. They're elected at the beginning of each new session of Congress, and obviously he went through a contentious election about whether or not he even wanted the job, based upon some of the issues they had with Tea Partiers within Congress. The Speaker is the one that presides over the House, oversees the business. He's the official spokesperson, and is second in line in presidential succession. So basically, something bad happens to the president, where he dies, vice president, then you go to the Speaker of the House. So they tend to be the liaison that work their way through, between the House and, the president. And this is a huge role. And Paul Ryan, obviously with his background and his credentials, brings a lot to the table there. All right. Next, we have our President of the Senate, which would be my favorite position, Vice President. Your job is to vote in the case of the tie. If you remember from the film Gun Down, we saw that happen with Al Gore, with the assault weapons ban. And generally, you don't have much of a role otherwise, calling order. They don't tend to be there too often. Okay? We have other positions as well, and you'll see that we have our President pro tempore. He's there. He presides over the Senate when the Vice President is not there. The next major position would be the Majority Leader, and we see that when we saw Mitch McConnell. We saw the interview between him and Harry Reid, the Minority Leader. The Majority Leader in the Senate is a powerful position. It is not, the same as being Speaker of the House, but they tend to get a lot done. They can push their agenda. They can make some major decisions. The House Majority Leader, second in command within the House, he pushes a large deal of the agenda for the Republicans or Democrats, whoever's in control of the House. And, they're supposed to be in lockstep with the Speaker of the House. Obviously, on the flip side of that, we have our House Minority Leader, who's Nancy Pelosi. She was our first female Speaker of the House, and then the Democrats lost control of that. Now she is our Minority Leader. The next two positions tend to be ones that we get confused about. A lot of people don't understand this idea of the whip. The whip it's like the idea is to whip votes in line, really get people in line. So they're going to be doing the grunt work of the House or the Senate. So they're going to be the ones making sure that, as you can see here, it's John Cornyn for the Republicans, that they're going to try to make sure that they get people in line, that they are voting, that they're going to, to do what their political party is telling them to do. Okay, next we're going to talk about how Congress makes decisions. Now, obviously, as we went through the chapter on interest groups, you have interest groups, you have political action committees, you have lobbyists that attempt to provide information, provide expertise, and sometimes do things that are a little bit more shady to, get them to do what they want them to do. On the flip side of that, there's also caucuses, and we did this in our WebQuest, where, you have members of Congress that caucus with one another. That means that they're meeting with one another. Okay, they might have as you can see here, some interest or characteristic. They might provide pressure. In some ways, they could be more effective than lobbyists. Here is the House Freedom Caucus. They tend to have a lot of power within the House, and that's just within the House. And they were known when, we were trying to choose a new leader of the House, a Speaker of the House, that, they were pulling some sort of sway. Paul Ryan wanted to make sure they were on board if he was going to join and be the Speaker of the House. A lot of people credit them with pushing John Boehner out. One that goes across both the Senate and the House would be something like the Rare Disease Congressional Caucus, where obviously, they're looking into expertise on rare diseases. They're looking to find cures for that. They're looking to do, obviously something within that regard. All right, on a side note to that, there's how Congress makes decisions. One way is the trustee, and we talked about this in class. For a trustee, you do what you think is right. You've been hired for that job. I'm going to do the right thing, and you just expect the people of your district or your state to get it. If you're a delegate, then you're doing basically what your state wants you to do or what your district wants you to do. If it's popular for them, it's got to be what you got to do, even if you disagree with it. If you're a politico, depending on what the issue is, you're going to do it. So on certain issues, you could go with your own gut. On others, you could go with what you want what your district or state wants you to do. And then there's partisan, which tends to be the way we're voting right now. As you saw in that 60 Minutes clip where they talked about, is Congress broken? Where you have people that are voting with their party 98% of the time are still considered disloyal and are still targeted because they're not doing the right thing. When we saw that clip with Grover Norquist and the pledge, if you raise taxes, then he could be targeting you or go against the Republican agenda. So those tend to be some things that go on. And the final concept here is this thing called log rolling. Okay, so you're dealing with members. It's trading off to say, okay, if I do this favor for you, you'll vote this way for me. Which also shows you why a lot of members of Congress don't always make it or become president, because sometimes they will have to log roll in order to do things for their district or their state. They'll have to trade off votes, and that sometimes will cause a record, and then they'll have to defend that or why they did that as they go for election as president. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is committees, and obviously, committees, and we looked at that in the book, and we looked at that in our WebQuest. There are certain standing committees, meaning they're permanent, okay? And we see them within the House. We have agriculture, appropriations, armed services. You could read the rest. And within the Senate, and you see, obviously, that there's a lot of doubling up there, that there's basically the same ideas. One that's different from both would be Ways and Means, and that gets into where House will address the funding of government and the Senate will not. Okay, next we have joint committees, okay? Those include members from both houses who work together on issues. The 4 joint committees are economic, printing, taxation, and library. Obviously, as you're hammering out a bill, it has to go through both houses. They provide a great deal of insight, and they could make a great deal of sway as far as what is going on. Conference committee. They're going to settle the differences between 2 bills. Obviously, some funky things could happen within that, and that bills could be switched around. So a conference committee is going to look at, what's the House version of the bill, what's the Senate version of the bill, how can we, come to a compromise, or they won't use the word compromise, maybe common ground on what we should be doing. Our next type of committee would be a select committee or a special committee, and obviously we've had a select committee on Benghazi, and they've studied that ad nauseum, as I would say. Is they've gone through it left and right. They're continuing to go through it, where they're looking into what happened there. Is Hillary Clinton at fault? Should she be tried for anything? Another one of my favorites was when they went to baseball and steroids, and our government actually spent an afternoon looking into what should be done about steroids in baseball. And you can see Rafael Palmeiro down there telling people flat out, I did not do steroids, and it came out a year later. He did do steroids, and basically everybody there was lying about it. But our government spent a whole day on it for one reason or another. And obviously when we talk about bills could die in committee. There's the committee chairs. They pull a great deal of power. Obviously within the Senate, it's based on seniority, whereas in the House, they actually get to elect who the committee chairs are. You can see the list right here. Committee chairs, they could pull a great deal of power within the Senate or the House, and they make a great deal of decisions about what will be the path of the bill, what should happen, and where we're going with each thing. All right. And obviously when we look at what we do, that there's also the process of, and if you look up top here, got it cut off, it's 40 years of the presidential veto. Vetoes are obviously the president's answer for whether or not they like a bill or a law. You can see here that President Obama has not vetoed many bills, where you have George W. Bush. He did a little bit more, and we could work our way down. We see a great deal of vetoes as we get back down to Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford. All right. There's also the process of the pocket veto and the committee work, where sometimes, again, we talked about that before, that bills can die in committee. They talked in here, there's 5,000 bills dropped in the hopper every year, but only about 10% of those actually make it through, and that's just through committee. There's a process in the Senate to try to kill bills, which would be the filibuster. We had a couple years ago with Rand Stand, where he was trying to go against President Obama's Patriot Act, or actually not President Obama's, but President Obama's use of the drones through the Patriot Act, through other means. He stood for a very long time. Obviously didn't match up to Strom Thurmond when he tried to filibuster the Civil Rights Act. None of them actually worked, though. They went around it. Congress and the president. And for years, Congress had more power. Then the president's gained more power, and now there's been certain pushes to take power back away from the president. Okay, so as we talk about Congress and the president, so we look at, especially since the 1930s, the president has often seemed to be more powerful than Congress. In some cases, Congress has handed over power to the president. But Congress retains several key powers over the president, such as the funding powers, oversight, and impeachment or removal. In the early years of the Republic, Congress seemed to be the most powerful branch, and I've always said they are. During the Civil War, the executive took many powers and became larger and wielded powers previously unheard of. Following Civil War, Congress took back some of the president's authority. These shifts have continued throughout our history. In recent years, the presidency has been quite powerful, particularly since Franklin D. Roosevelt, obviously the New Deal. He is taking a great deal of power. All right, so we want to look at their functions. So first we have the oversight functions, okay? So we have the power to impeach, as we see here. We also have the power to confirm, which took a long time to confirm Loretta Lynch as our Attorney General, and our War Powers Resolution. In that power, basically, we have not declared a war since World War II, but yet we were sending troops. So, Congress got very fed up with what we were doing. So what they do is they create the War Powers Act of 1973, saying basically, president needs permission in order to send troops. If troops have been there over 60 days, there's no approval by Congress, then president needs to pull them back. Should also, basically work within the means. And generally, the presidents have spoken to Congress. They have looked into, clearly, obviously, we're still involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Congress did have some votes on those. Again, we didn't declare war. Congress and the Supreme Court. Again, we look at, Obamacare. That's something, the Affordable Care Act that was passed by Congress, went before the Supreme Court with King versus Burwell. There were people on various sides of that. President Obama obviously wanted to keep it. Some members of Congress wanted it taken away. Supreme Court, in the end, decided, in the 6-3 decision that we were going to stick with it. But the Supreme Court could have struck it down. We would have had to have lived with whatever they did. All right, so at this time, I'm going to wrap this up. Obviously, I didn't get into how a bill becomes a law. I would encourage you guys to watch on Just a Bill, go back through it within the chapter as well. Hopefully you're studying tonight. Obviously, you have a great deal to look at. Look at the films as well. Figure this all out. And any other questions, please come see me. Good luck.